Party, party, party. Last panel of our wonderful session here. This is so great. After we did the 3D avatars session, which is, if you haven't already taken a look at, please go do. I was talking to Pia. I was like, when are we doing fabrics? Because I want to be involved. I'll host. I'll just, run my mouth, whatever you need me to do. And this day has delivered. It's been a great day. So we are going to jump in on this panel and talk about how you should be storing, organizing, and sharing digital materials across your own organization and with external partners. Most of us who make garments are not also making our materials. So when we go into a digital space, we also have external partners we're working on to sometimes help us gather those materials or scan materials we have in-house. So we have a wonderful group of panelists. I'm just going to ask you guys to go around again and give your name, what company you're with, and title. I'm going to start with how you all are laid out on my screen, and that puts you first, Michelle. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Hi, no I'm Michelle Greenhouse. I am a senior 3D artist at Target, and I handle all of our digital materials.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. Yazan?
I'm founder and CEO of Swatchbook, Yazan Malkosh.
Awesome. Thank you, Yazan. And Jason?
Jason R. Brown. I'm the material designer for Tong Hong Tannery, and I manage all of our 3D systems.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. And Mary.
I'm Mary Grimm with New Balance, and I'm head of Global Digital Ops.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary. All right, panelists, we are going to do this game show style. So keep yourself muted. And if you want to jump in on a question, unmute yourself like your little buzzer, and you can answer our daily double. Okay, so let's get started. And I want to begin with figuring out how we're starting to make decisions. So how are you using digital materials to make decisions? And currently, what are the biggest obstacles when it comes to moving a material along the process, both internally and externally? Mary, I'm going to toss this one to you first.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here, but I'll definitely keep it at a high level from decision making for us. And I still think all things digital are in their infancy, to be honest. I think we've had a real breakthrough period with lots that have gone on in the globe. As we all know, it's forced change in behavior. But for us, palette adherence, it's the fundamentals. It's probably not as sexy, but it's really helped with that. And that is all part of the decision-making process. And then on top of that, I'm in operations, and I got to tell you, the time that it gives us back, which is priceless. Time is not something we can buy, so it's something we can create by advances like this. So that's been huge in all aspects. And then the reduction in waste, making decisions has gotten easier and better. That we're making more informed decisions up front. That's been awesome. And I will say those are the big ones. And then as far as obstacles, again, I'm in operations. I'm going to wear that hat and just say change management has really been, and not in a bad way. It's just changing behaviors and the way we think about things, I think always is a struggle. So that is something when you have momentum and you have success, right? That pushes that along. And so, for us, change management has really been starting small, find your good partners within the organization, those folks that are more, I would say, bleeding edge in terms of change. And we pilot things a lot. We do it quickly. We learn from that, and then we scale. So that's how we've done it. And I think in a nutshell, I hope I touched on everything there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary. And we're going to jump to Michelle.
Hi. Some of the things that I've heard people using digital materials for in terms of making decisions is for design iterations and colorways. Reducing of lab dips and hand looms has been kind of important for us and other brands and retailers that I've talked to. Obviously, Mary touched on this sample reduction and sustainability. They're huge ways that we have seen people using digital materials to make decisions. Assortment reviews, line reviews, milestone meetings, all of these things have been instrumental. Thank you.
Awesome. So, Michelle, I want to stick with you for a second because I'm wondering if you talked about the different channels that you've used materials to make decisions. Have there been, any particular obstacles when it comes to managing those materials and making them available for all of those different departments to use them?
Yeah. There's obviously lots of obstacles. We're going to touch on this later in some of the other questions, but like storing them, naming them, finding them are all different obstacles. But one of the obstacles that we've seen is still, and some of your other panels have touched on this, is having trust in the physics of the material. And we hope that we can solve this with some work that I've been doing on the 3DRC, which is the 3D Retail Coalition. And we're working on a digital fabric interoperability work stream where we hope you can test the fabric once on classical testing equipment and use this throughout multiple different softwares. And we hope that this will build trust, also help with scaling and things like that, which we'll talk about a little later. Did
Awesome.
that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to I didn't want to skip over all of your knowledge on, getting it to those partners, especially with that sort of obstacles component. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Yeah, another obstacle I just thought of was color. That's a big obstacle. And I think someone alluded to this earlier, that would be a whole nother spotlight in general, where we can talk about digital color and the different obstacles that come with that as well.
Yeah, marrying digital color across materials in the physical space is difficult enough. And then you bring it in digital. There are lots of concerns there. Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm going to jump to Jason.
Yeah, digital color. Oh my gosh, we need to have one of those. It's such a pickle. I was just thinking about like the power of the tool too. Like, just as a material designer, the design process is, still the same. So we're in sort of concepting phase and still a very sort of physical process. But now that we have these 3D Viz tools, you get to a point in the process where you're narrowing down the material and the aesthetics, and then you get to that specific part where you're like, oh yeah, I can visualize this now. And I think one of the in the old days, we would get to that point where we would go to the email and we'd start emailing of the factory. Okay, I want to see this, and here are the steps, and yada yada yada. And now we go into the Substance Designer or whatever tool it is and start visualizing that. But I think like one of the challenges just for us has been, so now you have a rendering. And so now you send a rendering to the factory. And I've had to render like multiple views, of course, because if it's a metallic material and you're trying to tell the factory, I want this level of metallic, you almost get to a point where you got to start rendering animations, or you got to kind of do turntable animations. So that's been a little bit of a challenge because, they're very much still a physical factory, and it's a dirty factory. We're thinking about like, do we get everyone in R&D, do we get them iPads so that we can render animations and then they can run around with, sort of industrial iPads so they can go out and, okay, now we're matching the video. So I think that's kind of been some of the challenges currently with us is like, okay, I can render everything here and it's great, it's beautiful, and it looks fantastic. But once we get to R&D and we get into the factory, what do we do? How do we take those renderings into the factory? How does that translate?
Yeah, those are little things that you don't always think about in the physical space. When you have like a metallic material, for example, you've seen it move because more than likely the model is moving a little bit, but those are things that aren't necessarily inherent in 3D. The garment may simulate on the form, but you're not seeing it move or interact with the space automatically the way we do in real life. Awesome. Great points, guys. Thank you. So I want to dive into, let's just talking about some best practices. So we sort of gone into how we're using materials to make decisions today, but let's jump into what are the best ways to, for example, request a material, store a 3D material, or track a 3D material. Any ideas for best practices? Yazan, I'm coming to you.
Yeah, thanks. For us, we can, obviously as a material platform, we look at how our customers use our platform and often engage into kind of their current practices of how they're doing this and how to improve that beyond it. And it does take a level of discipline because you do need to get your supply. I mean, it doesn't have to be the supplier directly, but the content of that supplier, digitized initially. Certainly with us as a material platform, you basically load up your materials and your content. But what we've seen is that the brands have kind of been moving along to just getting their suppliers and their supply chain digitized. And what I mean by that is onboarding them to also utilize a platform so they're communicating on the same level, not just swapping files around and things like that, but in a more consistent live manner, giving you a live access into their material database as well. And so each one would have a digital showroom that you can basically go in there and find materials that are off the shelf. But also, at the enterprise level for everybody that's on the call, a lot of them are just exclusive materials or custom developed materials. And so still using the same platform for us to kind of start at the supplier, get it into the hands of the brands. If I need different colors, digitally at least, I can go back to the supplier, or I can do that on the platform itself or provide my version of that. And as Jason was alluding to, there are different challenges like metallicness and seeing things in 3D as well as 2D, photo view, 3D video form. It's not one or the other, but it's a combination of all those experiences to store that kind of data, to access that kind of data, and track. Has this been used on a product? Did I already get a physical sample of this in-house? Where is it stored? Multiple, these enterprise brands, I'm sure everybody here understands, I might have different material libraries, one that's at the headquarters, one that's in Asia. How do you know where all these things reside? I think digital is a wonderful solution. That always reminds me of the sequence from the Matrix when they've got those shelves of weapons and they can kind of filter through and go through them. It's the same thing for materials and assets that come with materials, trim, hardware, things like that.
Awesome. It's interesting with the virtual materials because if you have to figure out a system for storing them, but you also then want touch points or figuring out how you're storing the physical samples or swatches and things like that. So your team, especially like in a fit session, can have access to that if you really want them to go into a digital space. So thank you so much, Yazan. And I'm going to go to Jason and then Michelle.
Yeah, I just want to bring up the point too that it's not file sharing. We're exchanging materials in the digital sense, but we have been exchanging materials in the physical sense for a long time. And having a swatch that you like, when you see a swatch, sort of the process that happens in your mind, when you see a swatch, oh my God, I love it. Instantly, you need to know, what is the price? Oh my God, I can afford it. Now you need to know the physicals. What's the abrasion? How's the crocking? And it just happens like at light speed. And that's the process that exists. So, when we get into exchanging digital materials, the data has to be there because the exact same process happens. And in a physical swatch without a label is just entirely useless. It can't be spec'd and doesn't answer all those questions. So that's the important factor. And it just isn't like file sharing, because when you put the files in a drop, that's the data isn't there. And that's like one of the great things that's been so helpful for us. And, I think everybody here uses the swatchbook platform, but the swatchbook platform, provides all that. So I think, and I say this a lot too, that as we get going into this new sort of like digital frontier, a lot of questions happen. And one of the easy ways to answer a lot of the questions is, what are we doing in the physical world? What do we already do in the physical world? Yeah, we have a lot of that we have to keep doing. So materials data is super important.
I love that component of thinking about it really in terms of user experience as well, and matching that experience with the what happens in the real world. I think most of us who've worked in New York have had a lone swatch with no labels on it, running from store to store trying to find it. So yeah, we definitely want to avoid that in digital space because it is a much larger situation. It's not just a few blocks wide, like the garment district. Thank you so much, Jason. I'm going to go to Michelle and then Mary.
Yeah, I wanted to add that in my experience, it's been super helpful to have a proper naming convention for your materials. It's just kind of a mundane, basic thing when you're talking about storing, requesting, finding, searching, all of that stuff. That's been helpful for us is to have a consistent naming convention throughout apparel, footwear, soft home fabrics, all of that along the way. And then having a single source of truth for that material has also been a key variable that has come up from time to time in my discussions with lots of people about this topic. We wanted to bring those two things up. And then I think another thing that's been important in terms of requesting a material, storing a material, tracking a material, is having a visual representation of that material. It's been really important as well. That's it.
If I can add that source of truth that Michelle just said is just so crucial to understand. I think that for us is kind of the vision of what we are also striving, is that specific sentence, the single source of truth starting at the supplier level.
Awesome. Mary.
That's just, and I just wanted to add a couple things. Having a great partner, which we do with Swatchbook, but to add to say this virtualization of materials is the great equalizer. I talked about buying time, but it is really equally in all parts of the world, getting materials in people's hands, so to speak, to make decisions has been amazing. And that the piece of it that Michelle talks to about data, without the right data, without that one source of the truth, the material you're still running around the streets of New York looking for information. So those two things in equal measure, right? The material is the part, it's the product, it's the part we all look to, but with equal passion and I would say leadership on the data piece of it. I mean, it's really been instrumental in us moving forward with materials. And I'll say it starts with having a good partner to work with to begin with. And that's just what I wanted to add.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So I want to jump back to, we touched on color and how it could be spun off into its own spotlight, but we do have a question from the audience. Digital color is also impacted by the devices that are used for visual output, such as phones, monitors, etc. Is this group working on this side of things as well? Like, what does that look like with making sure you have the right hardware to view these things? Jason, you're unmuted, so you got something to add?
Yeah, I would say, and that's a totally valid question, and that's a question. Viewing different RGB output devices. We've been having that conversation for a long time, for decades actually. But there's the gamut of difference between the RGB devices, phones, monitors, all of that thing. It's maybe this big, but the real question is the gamut of the materials. It is massive. So you can have like a chiffon over here and a suede over here, even in the same color. They're going to be miles and miles apart. So, there's the viewing of the materials. There's sort of color accuracy of viewing the materials on different devices, but there's also just, I guess, for me as a designer and a manufacturer of materials, every material and material types have their own gamut. So that becomes the even larger question, because plastics take color very well. So you can have a synthetic textile that's going to be 98% all the time, and suede at the other end of the spectrum, suede is a very limited kind of color gamut. So that's one of the things, is like building in the color gamut of the material types, I think is super important as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Anyone else have any suggestions when it comes to devices, or any work happening on that side to make sure you're all set to view those materials? Yazan.
I mean, I think, one of the biggest challenges, and I think I saw that in the chat as well, is, calibration of devices. I know that question comes up a lot, but then you ask, is your monitor calibrated? Is your phone calibrated? Is your tablet calibrated? And then do you have, what's it called? The hue shifting for your iPad off, was it time or something called something time, that basically changes the color of the display. And on top of all of this, I think what people need to realize is that when we're talking about anything with RGB, you're looking at something that emits light and you're comparing it to something that reflects light. And that is fundamentally two different things, right? A piece of fabric, you're looking at what light has been reflected on it versus a display that's emitting light towards your eyes. And there, I don't know if we'll ever get to 100% this matches that, but what we try to do is provide, when a supplier actually puts a material, is to provide a place where they can put the actual code, a Pantone or a QTX file, or anything that indicates how to manufacture that specific color or dye, alongside with the material, and kind of reference that in there. It's not a perfect solution, but certainly better than not having that data, right? We're just increasing the amount of information that you have access to, but it is something to keep in mind that you're looking at two different worlds. And on top of this, both of them, again, in the same way that when you walk with a swatch in the streets of New York and you're, under the shaded sidewalk, or you might be in the sunlight, or if it's an overcast, that changes the colors. Similarly, on a device, when you're looking at a device and it's shifting its colors based on the time of day or by dimming it, your eyes perceive it differently. And on top of all of this is the subjectivity of how people see color to begin with. I'm sure everybody knows the black, blue, white, gold dress debacle of I don't know what year, but it's something that it's real. That stuff happens, and I think people just need to be a little bit aware of it. And I think Mary's earlier point on and Michelle's on trusting. Is this something I can trust? And I think there's certainly a level of trust that you have to make, but also an understanding of what how accurate can it be versus do I have enough information to make a decision?
Yeah, that brings back some sort of PTSD from having a pink gown that photographed in a very different color of pink than it did in person. And we're like looking at the fabrics like, wait, did we get the right pink? Did we just make this dress in the complete wrong color? It's like, no, it just changes a lot. So I'm going to jump to Mary and then Michelle.
I just wanted to add, and all thoughtful points, especially about color. I've entered into conversations with our IT group, actually, and it's been about there's a new standard that we really have to embrace with our own technology, right? Starts internally. No one's going to be tougher on product and materials than we are. And we should be. That this is what we do. But it is a new standard, and it's definitely super important to bring those folks who we want to be out in front of it, right? To be aware that the needs have changed, and it's not just designers need it or the color specialists need it. We all need it now. So many of us are involved in the decision-making process. So I think getting a jump start on that, getting the partners in and informed, and then making them advocates for us, if you will, out in the marketplace. So they're staying on top of what's available. So it can be ubiquitous in the next generation, as we're keeping our technology up to date. And that way we're not chasing it. And many of us are right now a little bit just to get ourselves up to speed. So that's one thing. And then the next thing is, and I remind myself and my team often, whether we can see whether we have the technology or not, as we start to more virtualize our experience with our customers, we all buy stuff on the web every day, whether we're on, super expensive equipment or not, we're still making purchasing decisions. So, one layer at a time, right? It'll start to improve on its way out. But I worry more about what we have internally than how we're presenting out, knowing if we get it right, then it's going to translate regardless of the platform.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary. And then we'll jump to Michelle.
But I'll just echo pretty much education is key in this point. All the things that Yazan said about the monitor emitting light versus the fabric actually reflecting light are super, super important. But education, even starting internally first and then externally, and then possibly bringing in standardizations as well. But first you have to educate people on it because it is so complex.
Awesome. That also gives them an opportunity to understand what variables will sort of be in their way, right? Just having that unlock in their brain, to Yazan's point, of like reflecting light, emitting light, different processes, different things. Awesome.
Gives people a different bandwidth. Yeah.
Right. And it just helps you sort of take a step back, breathe, and say, okay, I understand what's happening here. And I'm ready to move forward and understand what's going on. Michelle, I'm going to stick with you a little bit because I want to talk about transformation at scale. I think sometimes at PI conferences, it's really easy to get trenched in how things are running at big businesses, but there are lots of smaller businesses out there, just folks at different points in their implementation. So how does management of digital materials change when talking about your foundational digital transformation and digital transformation at scale?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Basically, what I found in talking to lots of people in the industry is that digital transformation takes time, and you have to start somewhere, but in order for mass transformation to happen, it has to happen at scale. And that means it has to happen closer to the source, closer to where the fabrics are actually made. So we think that, this digital twin that people have been talking about needs to happen at the supplier level. Or me, people, and other people in the industry think that it has to happen at the supplier level where the fabric gets digitized as well as presented to you with the physical testing as well. So not only do you get a physical fabric, but you get your digital fabric as well from the supplier. So for mass transformation to happen, it kind of has to happen at the source.
Awesome. Thank you. It makes the most sense to get buy-in at that point because everyone else who deals with those materials is really dealing with them secondhand, right? And we don't have the same knowledge that the factory is going to have or the mill in terms of how the structure of that weave is and how it responds in the real world. And they also have a vested interest in improving, right, those things. So I'm excited for a future when that happens. It sounds like we have a little bit more work to do before we get there. Thank you so much, Michelle. Do any of the rest of the panelists have any ideas on what transformation looks like in the early stages versus at scale? Jason.
I just want to echo what Michelle mentioned, that the material, the source coming from the supplier. Like me as a manufacturer of materials, the brands that are using my materials digitally, I want them to be using the assets that I provide rather than them scanning the materials themselves, because I want to set them up for success. And I want to set them up to be able to create iterations of my materials in a way that we can produce them commercially. I want to get them off on the right foot.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. Okay, just give me a second. I want to scan the questions from the audience. So Jason, since we left off with you, we actually have a question pointed directly to you from the audience. How much time do you spend organizing your digital materials compared to capturing them? Do you have a system you'd use to train a brand who wants to learn from your experiences?
We don't really have a system for training the brands other than just, setting up Zoom kind of calls to walk through, this is how this material works. I use Substance Designer for all of our materials to author all the materials. So that's setting up Zoom calls to walk people through, this is how the Substance Designer file works for this particular file. These are the options. But we use the swatchbook platform to exchange materials with the brands that use our materials. And what's really great, I think, about the swatchbook platform is that, obviously it standardizes everything, but it also lets me upload the different file types. And for the time it takes, scanning versus authoring or organizing, it kind of depends on the material type. The more simple materials scan on a Visu scanner, and those are 5-minute materials. And then the more complex materials, there are some color shifting, metallic, iridescent materials or high-end and ISO materials that take 12 hours to scan on the TAC 7. So, there's quite a wide spectrum. I don't know if that answers the question 100%.
Thanks. I imagine it does. I hope the audience member who posed that question is feeling seen right now. Thank you, audience members, for your questions. And the rest of you guys, feel free to keep submitting questions to the chat. And Michael from PI will send them over to me. So on this topic, we're sort of keeping on a little choo-choo train of discussion here. I want to talk about supplier collaboration. So material suppliers are keen to learn which brands are engaging with which of their materials. Brands, on the other hand, are keen to survey material analytics across both their supply chain and further afield. Does the panel know of any platforms working to make this information more open and accessible? So are there any platforms that are, well, I think we sort of have a hint that there is one, right? Yes, but what is happening to make this information more open and accessible?
Well, so what and obviously this takes a good amount of time because before the data is useful, there has to be a good amount of data. So this year, announced the availability of analytics, and we're starting actually with our suppliers first. We do work with some key brands that do also have access to some of that analytics as well. But what this provides the suppliers with, and the reason we started with the suppliers, because it's their data. They need to have some insight into that information and kind of how it's being utilized. When Jason, for example, shares a collection, let's say with Mary or Michelle, he'd like to know, hey, did you guys actually open up the materials I sent you? Which ones did you guys, view? Which ones did you like? Which ones, some insight into that gives him a better understanding of his business and what to focus on and what people are liking from the things that he's producing, because you're kind of steering it blind. And I'll probably let Jason just talk about his experience from a supplier perspective on analytics in general. And the idea is to do the same thing for the brand level, for them to see also, what are the materials in their library? What are their designers looking at? How are they being used? And so those types of, and at this point, I don't want to call it insight because it's just data. I think the next step after collecting data is asking the right questions. It's how do you look at that data in an insightful manner? And that's not something that I think we would do at Swatchbook, but more of Mary, Michelle, and others would pose those questions and ask us, hey, can you put in, I want to see this because I think this is of importance. I want to see that because that's of importance to me or my team. And we did that with the supplier side. We've kind of opened it up to some key brands. We're getting a bit more insight into how they're utilizing or how they'd like to utilize that type of data, and then continuously provide that to both sides. Because I think that's one of the things that was missing from the physical world. If somebody grabs a physical swatch book, you don't know what they looked at. You don't know if they're interested in anything. You don't know if they're gonna. I think it helps. And again, I'm speaking maybe prematurely for Jason instead of him speaking for himself. It gives him insight into an anticipation of, what do I focus on next season? Or do I anticipate there's going to be a lot of use for this specific material? So I'm going to hand off the mic slowly to Jason, which I hope is on my left-hand side. But that's at least on our side. That's what we're trying to do.
All right, I'm going to jump to Jason and then Michelle. So Jason, go aheid.
Yeah,
Design has passed the mic to you.
The analytics are super helpful because there's always, and this, I don't think, this doesn't really matter, like if you're on the brand side or the supplier side, but sort of as a material supplier and material designer, there's always the materials that we focus on and we think throughout the season, okay, New Balance is going to love this material. Oh my God, they're going to go crazy for it. And then you never really know. Like sometimes if you're there and you can kind of gauge the sort of engagement in the physical sense. But what's so awesome about the analytics is you can see like, oh, okay, yeah, someone like this material, but oh my gosh, look at this other material that we weren't even thinking about it. And it's getting a lot of engagement. And it gives me back something to like, okay, I can see that they're going crazy for these patents. They're really engaging with these patents. And then it gives me a point to reach out like, oh, hey, I've got 19,000 other patent variations for you. So it just helps, like, it helps to give us more feedback on various iterations on different material types.
Awesome. I sort of, in my mind, I'm seeing this as like some sort of data to monitor seismic activity. Like, okay, there's a little movement going on over here with this material. I think the tidal wave on patents might be coming for us a little later. Let's be on the lookout. Awesome. I'm going to jump to Michelle and then Mary.
Okay. I just wanted to add that analytics can be useful for everybody at every stage of the company as well, because we are often tapped and so many times, like, for your measurements at the end of a quarter or for, this, that, or the other thing, but analytics are just used in business everywhere. So I think every company is interested in the analytics. And for me, I often wonder, like, how many times was this material used that I uploaded and saved and whatever, and how many people used it? And what did they use it for? Was it for a shirt? Was it for a pant? Did they change the color of this fabric? Like, those are the types of analytics that I think about when I think about a digital material. I just wanted to add that as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And having that information does allow you to sort of make an even better argument for things to continue to open up and information to be more accessible, because we're not just placing the value on the material itself, but understanding how it's being used and how people are interacting with it, and providing data along the whole process and not just at the end when the order is made. I think that's so cool and helpful to keep making that push. I'm going to go to Mary, and then Yazan, we'll close with you, right? We'll close this topic. Panel's not done yet, audience members. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. Whew, clutch the pearls. We're okay. Mary, take it away.
This is great conversation to have, and I think we're just scratching the surface of it. But I just wanted to add, and starting, the data for me, it starts with, the trend information, right? And I know we do lots of what we're talking about in bits and pieces now, but connecting the art and science, the data with the concepts, or I'll say, where we're going to start off a season, what we're rallying around, what that is for the brand. And then the material selections, obviously we create these palettes, we're curating, we're doing what we think is right, because we're working with our partners internally. But that point about what are people gravitating towards initially, right? And going through those iterations, and more than just that, when the seismic activity starts, and I like thinking about it that way, it's really like, what are the products that took off? Where's the volume? And it's art and science, right? Because it's patterns, it's product, it's colors, but material plays a huge part in that. And I think in analyzing the data, we can really start to see what those materials are that are head and shoulders above the rest in terms of driving purchasing decisions. And so I think our suppliers can benefit from it, and I think the brands can benefit from it too. So there's definitely a lot to learn here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary. Yazan.
What I wanted to add was that, we're still at the beginning of this, and we were just talking about the supplier and the brand at this level. But imagine when you start bringing in data also coming in, as kind of Mary was alluding to, also some trends from the consumer side, and you pump that into a designer's toolkit, and they have access to this. There's so much talk in the industry about overstock and dead stock, and having platforms to sell all that extra stuff that's been made. What we're trying to do is actually eliminate it. What if Jason can see, like, hey, I don't need to make this material at all, because hey, it's not tracked. And I'm not talking about like full, even just, this is just full production runs, but production runs, sample runs, even the tiny, sample swatches that get shipped everywhere. If I see that this is this color or this material or this combination isn't tracking, I don't put money in there. I don't put time in there. I don't put material that's going to basically end up in a landfill somewhere. So while it's great that there are, solutions to kind of get rid of overstock, and we've seen a couple of them just pop up, I think, even from certain brands, I think we want to remove as much of that as possible. Let's not make it initially if we're not going to be using it or not selling it directly from the maker or creator.
Yeah, if the consumers are not going to enjoy wearing it, why are we making it? And I think sometimes that's in design, we get excited about certain materials and things they can do. But at the end of the day, my mom is like, what is this? I don't want to wear this. And it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. Well, no money from mom. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So I want to jump to a question from the audience. So we've been talking about some of the sort of stakeholders within the brands that will touch and work with the materials. So would love to hear from this group about whether you think an enterprise organization needs a 3D material role, or whether they believe existing development, design, sourcing teams should be handling this. In either situation, what is a tipping point to go either way? And this audience member, I kind of wish we had reached out to you in the beginning for putting some of these questions together. That was beautifully worded. I'm glad I got to say it. I feel like an actress. So what's the tipping point for deciding whether or not you have a materials person, or you're adding this to the roles and responsibilities of the people you have in-house? Jason.
I would say that just one point that I want to make is that that you still need to have the person who is familiar with the material. The person needs to be a material expert a bit more than they need to be a 3D material expert, because it's not about texturing a video game. It's so you still just have to know the materials. It still is very important for the person managing the materials to be, maybe an expert, or to know to have a material knowledge more so than the 3D material knowledge. So number one, if you can only afford one person, it's got to be a materials person. If you can afford two people, have a materials person and a 3D material. I think that's where you can really make magic, if you can have both.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. We're going to jump to Mary.
I think that's spot on, Jason. And I will say, from using your resources and using your subject matter expertise in-house, and we are lucky and fortunate enough to have that within New Balance. And it really is that blend. We all bring to the table different experiences and different skill sets, and being able to marry that up between the materials expertise and let's not forget about data. Data matters here. And the technical 3D piece of it, to find that blend of expertise and putting that together and making sure that strong partnership forms that process, I think is critical. And I am willing to bet more enterprise businesses have that in-house, especially if they're starting with 3D. They might be bringing in the 3D piece of it, but I think the other elements are likely there, and just making sure you're connecting the dots with the people.
Awesome. I like that message about connecting dots, because one of the things that's important to understand as well about materials is you have textile scientists and you have people who make cloth and you have people who make things from that cloth, and their base of knowledge and their understanding of how to work with it is different even in the physical world. People we will take fabric and do things to it that the mill didn't necessarily anticipate that we would do with it. And our technical knowledge around what to do with those materials as well. Like someone at the mill will know how to apply materials to make denim stretch, but then someone at the brand level or actually making the garment will know, okay, this is what we need to do with this stretch denim to make sure the collar doesn't roll up, right? Because of the stretch. So, you need those different bases of knowledge to help you connect those dots. So I'm going to jump to Michelle. I saw you had your mic unmuted, so you've buzzed in to answer this question.
I was just going to echo what everyone had to say. And Mary had said this before, but it's a real art and science. Understanding the construction of a garment is critical to understanding how it's going to drape, and knowing all the different aspects of 3D is really helpful. But I was just going to add that, you can be trained. I have a background in textiles, but I was trained in 3D along the way. And so now I luckily have the knowledge of both. And I totally agree that this, whoever this materials person is, does need to have the technical background, but it is really an art and science. And I love how Mary put that together. And then to address the tipping point, you just start off right off the bat with a materials person. It's just going to be easier and cleaner, in my opinion. Then it's not so messy, and you just have someone dedicated to that work. And that's what they do every day. That's just my recommendation.
And they become a nice support person for the rest of the team as well, who maybe don't have that knowledge. So when you have people who cross skills, like Michelle, for you, for example, having a background in textiles and then going into 3D, I'm sure that makes you even more of a powerhouse, having that, background in textiles and being able to have those conversations with the folks making the virtual meshes and materials. Awesome.
And they tend to trust me more because I have that background in how a material is actually made from the yarn level. So
awesome.
That's good.
So a master dot connector. Mary?
I just, thanks to Michelle for bringing up that point about the people and adding on. People do, more than anything, it's the right person, right? So having somebody with that, a foundational background, they can learn. And those dots that I was talking about connecting, especially in these new processes, we're all learning from each other, right? There's an exchange there that kind of spills over between the individuals and the groups, that they're continuously learning and making the process better. And, I'll give a shout out to Kevin Smith, who we're lucky enough to have at New Balance. That was that right blend of material expertise. He gets the knowledge piece of it and the business piece of it, and was really instrumental in us moving forward with this. And, he's on a well-deserved vacation, and he would be here right now. But I really think that foundationally, to Michelle's point, just start, find your right person, have a strategy, that's really critical, and just keep moving.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So Michelle and Mary, both of you have mentioned this being critical or that being critical. So let's talk about what's critical. How do you decide what's critical in your 3D material library?
Yeah, I can take that. Well, I think it really depends on what your business is. So think about what makes sense for your business. Here are just a couple of examples. Like if your business is super keen on sustainability, maybe that's the area you want to focus on in reduction of samples and then therefore increasing your sustainability. Or starting off with maybe some very easy fabrics like your twills and your jerseys and that kind of stuff is a kind of good way to start on what your core library would be first, the easy fabrics, and maybe save the metallics and the velvets and the loop terries for later in the line when you're building out your library. Maybe some other examples are if you have a fabric that's a real long lead time and it's faster and easier to make that fabric digitally, do that first. But I challenge everyone to maybe think about what's best for your business. Maybe you have some areas of your company that are early adopters and they're like ready to jump in. And so maybe it makes sense to do that, build that library for that brand first. Those are just some ideas.
Awesome. Thank you. And for the rest of the guys, what do you have any suggestions on what is critical for your 3D libraries? I'm going to go to Mary, then Yazan.
I can add to that, and everything Michelle said, yes. Like there's lots of pieces of that. It depends on what you're going after. I'll say that season, that year, whatever is important. And taking that, whatever is important, taking it up, it really starts with the end product for us. What do we want to do with it? What do we want to, it's that marriage of the 3D with what we want for the product. And that helps for us starting out the season. If we know what we're working on, that really hones us in on what materials that we're going to need. So it starts with the business. It starts with what's important to the product, what's important that season. And then over time, and we've been doing this for a little bit now, we're able to expand and say from a strategy standpoint, what do we want to go after? Is it sustainability? Is it, whatever business piece of it that it is? And again, that then informs what we're going to go after for materials.
Awesome. Mary, we can tell that you are in operations because in your last bit, you talked about have a strategy. And now again, sort of driving that home, it's like you can't figure out what's critical if you don't have a strategy. You have to understand your business, what the needs are, and then figure out what that low-hanging fruit is for you to get in and who's the most excited to take it. So absolutely reiterating, have a strategy. Thanks, Mary. Izan?
I mean, it's exactly to what's been said. I can also say that's the trend that we've been seeing where success stories with our brands and our customers have been. Focus on, it's kind of overwhelming when you think about legacy libraries. Like, oh, I've got 20,000 materials to digitize. Do you really need to use them tomorrow? Is that what you need them for the decision-making for the next season? Probably not all of 20,000. Focus on the next season, do the next season, work a little bit backwards. Do the next season, do a little bit backwards. And then what we've seen also is focus, as I think Michelle said, core material libraries. Then you can also expand to trims and stuff later, but focus on your best sellers, your most used, your classics, your basics, things that you're being utilized over and over. But we've had both arguments from different brands, and certainly where we've seen success is just that. Focus on the next season and then build backwards when the time permits.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we are getting down to the bottom of our time. I'm going to sneak in one last question. And we've sort of touched on this a little bit, but I just wanted to go over it again while we have some 3D RC folks and people who've really been entrenched in this work. And this is around standardization. Are we at a point where digital material file formats and file exchange standardization is developing? So where are we? Michelle, coming to you. Thank you.
So the 3DRC, the two different work streams that I'm involved in, one of them is focused on the digital fabric interoperability, which I brought up earlier. And that, in a nutshell, our hope is that we can digitize the fabric at the source with classical testing equipment and extract the data and use that data in multiple software. So that would help with speed. It would help with trust. It would help with lots of different things along the way. But in order for that to happen, there needs to be some sort of standard format. So that is definitely something that we're working on. And we plan to share out some learnings that we have in November at PI. So stay tuned for that. It's coming. I know it's been talked about for a very long time, but we have, there's some discussions of, lots of different file formats. There's the U3M, there's the AXF, there's the GTLF, there's, CSV or JSON. There's so many different file formats, but what is that one that could possibly be used in all software? So it's definitely being talked about. The second work stream that I'm involved in is called the Material Data Attribute Model. And that's where we're starting to identify what the mandatory attributes are that you would need for a digital material, such as what are those key parameters for physics that your PLM system or whatever system you're using would require. And we're starting to define what that would be for physics and then what it would also be for textures. So we have, I think, 10 or 11 brands working on this. And so far, about 60 different attributes that we've discussed so far. So yes, there is the idea that this would then get passed to somebody in the standards industry to help us, or multiple people in the standards industry to help us identify what that standard attribute model would be for digital material. That was a lot. Did that answer the question? Yeah.
That certainly gave me a snapshot of where we are and what's developing. I think 60 parameters. Wow. And again, it just speaks to the magic of fabric. It's an invention that has been with us for so long, and we continue to improve upon it. And I love it. I'm not at my home right now, but if I were, you could see stacks of fabric behind me just because I have a shopping addiction, and it usually manifests itself in the form of buying fabric. But yeah, it's just one of the incredibly fun parts of working in this industry, because there are always new things coming from our mills and our partners in working with materials. Awesome. So I'm going to give one more scan of our questions. We are at the bottom of our session here. We got that one. Got that question in Jason. And we've covered all of our topics, guys. Rock stars.